This evening we are pleased, as I said, to have with us the internationally recognized educator, best-selling author, child advocate, and parenting expert, Mary Gordon. In 1996, Mary founded the Roots of Empathy, an organization committed to building caring, peaceful civil societies through the development of empathy in both children and adults. In 2006, Ms. Gordon founded a complementary program informed by the power of empathy for early childhood settings called Seeds of Empathy. Mary speaks and consults regularly with governments, educational organizations, and public institutions, and has presented on early childhood development to conferences organized by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Health Organization, and the United States government, among others. In addition to these great accomplishments, Mary is a member of the Order of Canada and an Ashoka Fellow. Ms. Gordon has twice had dialogues with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, first in 2006 and then again in 2008. At that time, the Dalai Lama expressed to Mary that programs like Roots of Empathy will indeed build world peace. Please join me in welcoming Mary Gordon.
Thank you so much, Susan. Might want to pop it up. Okay, it's looking like it's needing a little encouragement to stay up, but that's all right. I can shrink too. Probably talking to you.
Is it going to stay? I think it'll stay.
That's fine. Thank you so much, Susan, for the warm invitation. And I just had a lovely dinner here on campus. Thanks to all the faculty here, the dean, and with our partners here, Wilma from the school board. Roots of Empathy has been very fortunate to be so beautifully received here in London by both your school boards and by your families and by the children, 1,000 last year plus, and going back to 2002. So it's quite a commitment, and we're certainly very grateful for all of that work. I think there's probably no greater revelation of a society than the way it treats its children. And there's many things we can measure, and I always figure we measure what we treasure. So what is it we measure? In education, and I'm an old school marm from a long time ago, you must measure literacy and you must measure mathematics, and there are many things we measure, not just to find out how the children are doing, but to find out how we're teaching. But do we really ever measure our humanity? Do we ever measure kindness? Do we ever measure love? Do we ever measure, because we don't know how to measure those things, but we need to be mindful of them, because the sum total of a person is more than their qualifications and their grades. The sum total of a person really is those intangible things that make us exquisitely human. And it's no accident that in the Roots of Empathy program, we work with a parent and an infant, because we are most vulnerable and are most human in that parent-infant relationship. It is the best model we have of empathy, which simply means understanding how another person feels. A baby has no words to tell you, but their body is a theater of emotion, and babies communicate completely through their feelings. And it's only when we develop words and language that we become increasingly distanced from our feelings. So what we do in Roots of Empathy is we help little children learn from a baby and a parent emotional literacy, which is the universal literacy. There are many literacies in childhood, but emotional literacy is universal. And what I mean by emotional literacy is having the names for your feelings. And in our work, the Roots of Empathy instructor, who's somebody from your community, she coaches the children in observing the baby and finding words to explain what the baby is doing, what the baby's intentions are, how the baby is feeling. And that language and those names and those words are worked on after the visit. When was a time that you felt frustrated like the baby? When was a time when you felt lonely? Because very often the parents will tell us that the babies cry when they're put to bed. And when we ask the children, why do you suppose the baby cries when the baby's put to bed? And all the little children know. When they get to be in about 7 and 8, grade 7 and 8, they have forgotten. But the little children will say, because the baby's lonely. They think you're downstairs having a party. And they're upstairs all alone. So babies need to be with us, and they cry when they're not with us. And there's a lot to be learned about the irreducible needs of a baby. And the vulnerability of a little infant brings out the very best in us and in the children. And when we strive to teach the children emotional literacy, and of course empathy is all mixed in with this, there's no child who says, I don't like that subject, or I've never been much good at that, or, you know, as we do in many things, you'll often hear a child say, well, I can't do math very well, and I have a reading problem. None of them have a problem with their feelings. And basically, little children don't learn in isolation of their feelings. They learn very much in context of their feelings. And there's not one of us sitting in the chair there who, when we're really upset, can be an efficient learner or perform functioning well in our job when we're deeply upset. And I think we try so hard to manage everything that we often deny the part of us that is most important, the part of us that defines us, part of us that connects us to one another. You know, it's so important that we help children learn to read. And in third world countries, it bridges the gap of misery. It's the key to freedom. It's the key to getting out of jail from poverty. But if we fail to teach children how to relate, we have lost our possibility for peace. Because if children don't develop peace in their hearts, if children don't come to know themselves, if children don't understand their own feelings, they'll never be able to understand how other people feel. So the very simple idea of learning from a little baby how that little baby feels and translating that into, yeah, I felt like that before, and then hearing how your friends feel, teaches children that you are not an island, you are not alone. And when they realize that they do understand one another, it really tips the ecology of the classroom. It allows children to see, oh, the boy who they thought was such a big wig is actually afraid of the dark, just like me. Because in the class, the children talk about what makes the baby cry, what's the baby afraid of. And that gives us the platform to say, what are we afraid of? What makes us cry? And how do you feel about crying? Because for some children, they're so ashamed to cry that they keep it in. And it's okay to keep it in as long as your words will help you to connect to someone to help you with how you feel. Because the rage that builds up, we have in society a steady uptick of emotional ineptitude. We have a generation, two maybe, of people who don't know how to regulate their own emotions. And that ability to identify and regulate your own emotions is essential in civil society. And we have, from the parent and the baby, usually it's a mother. And the way Roots of Empathy works, for those of you who haven't come across it, we invite a neighborhood parent and infant to really adopt a classroom, and the classroom adopts them. And they come to visit over the school year. And we have a curriculum and we train instructors. And the classroom teacher doesn't deliver the program, but is so important to the whole outcome of the program, because that teacher knows those children and has a deep commitment to their doing well and their good happiness. So this family that comes in, they start when the baby is only 2 to 4 months of age. And we roll out a green blanket. And the instructor helps the children observe with the baby. How is the baby feeling? What is the baby doing? We even say to the baby, the instructor says, "May I lift you up?" And the first time you say that, the children look at you like you're half-baked, because the baby can't talk. The baby at 2 or 3 months of age is helpless to respond back. So we say, well, let's see now what the baby is saying. What's the baby's face look like? And they'll tell you. And you'll say, is the baby looking at me? Or is the baby looking away from me? And then we'll say, well, what about the baby's hands? Are they a fist? Or are they loose and open? And what about the baby's body? Is it very straight and rigid? Or is it floppy, to use their word? The children will then tell you. And if the baby's making any vocalization, the children read the cues of the baby. And the capacity to read emotional cues is a huge protective factor in life. It is associated with success in the workplace, with success in family life. It is associated, such a simple thing. But when do we ever teach it? And the children develop this. We do a lot of asking of questions and roots of empathy. There are no right answers. We don't lecture the children. We don't tell them what they should be thinking. We invite them to think about what they're feeling. We invite them to think about what they're learning. In education, we call it metacognition. We do it all the time in Roots of Empathy. What did you learn today? What did you think about that? So this idea of emotional literacy, which we're getting close to having measures for. We do have measures for social and emotional competence. And we've used them in Ontario, and we've used them pretty well wherever Roots of Empathy is in the world. And we're in New Zealand, we've been in Australia and Japan, we're in Europe now. We just started in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. And it's so interesting why. Peace 3, the European Union, paid for it because they said, we have to start building peace with the children. The sectarian generational violence in Northern Ireland is palpable. You scratch the surface and there it is. When I was there earlier this year, the train station that I was going to take a train to go from Northern Ireland to Dublin, they had a bomb. And I was on the way to the station when it was blown up. Now, my husband heard about it, but it wasn't big news. I got a call on the BlackBerry, where are you? And this idea that in a civilized society where we all speak the same language and live in the same geography, that we can have the number of disasters that we have had where people are at war with one another out of memory rather than cause. They don't know why. If you ask them why, they can't tell you why. They'll say it's the way it is. It's the way it's always been. Well, the children are the only ones who can break patterns. We have to change the game. And we will change the game. Because when little children understand that we all share the same feelings, you have immediately a globalized interconnectedness. That they understand you may speak a different language, your skin may be a different color, you may eat different food, listen to different music, wear different clothes, but we all share the same feelings. And they learn that on the green blanket because we connect our feelings to the baby. The classroom teacher is invited to say, well, when was a time when you felt afraid as a child? And what did you do? The classroom teacher and the instructor and the mother of the baby. Everybody shares a time, and what we realize is that we're really all the one. And that if we share our vulnerability like that, we're able to help one another. So you get incredible things happen, that trust is built in the Roots of Empathy classrooms. That children realize, in the very first class we have, we explain, we're not going to be laughing at anyone here, especially the baby. And the children are a little surprised, well, why would we be laughing at a baby? But we'll say, well, you know, if the baby needs to have the diaper changed when the baby is here, sometimes when we feel a little embarrassed, we laugh. But we have to think about how the baby might feel if everyone's laughing at her, how the mom might feel if everyone's laughing at the baby. So children are always ready to think about how it might impact the baby. It might be a little different if we were saying, how would your friend feel if you laughed at him? But when you speak about this baby who they all fall in love with immediately, they say, well, we would never want to hurt the baby's feelings. And then when you learn through the months, it's a whole year program, that the way the baby feels is exactly how you feel. They realize. So very often we say, if the mom does have to change the diaper, we might say, now let's all have a little giggle together, because when the mom is going to change the diaper, we're not going to laugh. I do understand you might feel giggly. And some of the older children, if the mother is breastfeeding the baby and very discreetly at some point needs to feed the baby, and it is completely discreet, if the children are self-conscious, they talk about the rights of the baby to be fed as quite sweet. And you know, we don't care if the baby is bottle-fed, breastfed, moon-fed, it doesn't matter. We're really just trying to acknowledge the really importance of this first relationship, which is a template for every relationship in life. We are learning from this relationship of attachment and attunement. How we start in life has a lot to do with how we finish. And Roots of Empathy is making sure if some of the children didn't get a wonderful start, it's nobody's fault, and we're not looking to blame or shame anybody. But what we know is that you can develop the mirror neurons in the brain, can develop empathy when they see it happening. So they see it happening with a mother or a father and a little infant. They see it, they experience it. And when you have the multiple firing and wiring of the different sensory capacities, you have real change happening, measurable change happening. So this idea of learning from a baby, that the baby is the teacher, the children love that. You know the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, a child can raise a village too. The children love that. And they often draw pictures where they have the baby with a globe in the hand, because they really do feel that the little baby is powerful. Powerful because we all love the baby. The baby didn't do anything to deserve it. And we look for babies who have challenges. When I first started this in '96, I went to Sick Children's Hospital and I said, have you got any babies with cleft lip and club feet? They said, of course we do. We have a whole facial cranial unit. I said, I'd like to go and visit. So the social workers took me in and I trained 2 of them. And I said, I want to show that every baby is lovable. And I knew, because a friend of mine had had a baby who had a very severe cleft lip and cleft palate. And the mothers of any baby who have any kind of visible disfigurement, their fear is that somebody won't love my baby, or somebody will stare at my baby or be cruel to my baby. And we brought the one child I followed closely. And on one of the visits, just to share with you the incredible capacity of children to be empathic. I had 3 people visiting from Australia, and they sat down at a table. This was a group of children who were in 5th grade, so they're 10 years old. And the visitors sat down on top of a table at the end of the room, and the dad and the mom both attended with this little baby. And we had followed through all the various steps. How did you feel when you found out that the baby had this problem, etc.? Anyhow, the dad had said that the baby was not going to come to the visit the next month as scheduled, the next 3 weeks, because he was going in for his first surgery. Now, the children had all had a chance to feed the baby with a special tube, and one of the children, 10 years old, said to the father, "How do you feel about the baby going in for the surgery?" 10. So the father said, "Well, I feel like I'm betraying him." And the children were perplexed, and I don't think all of them understood what betraying meant. He said that because Victor won't understand, and we're not going to be there with him, and he's going to have some pain, and he's not going to see us right away, that I feel I want to be able to tell him and be with him every second. There wasn't a child in that classroom who didn't understand. And then another child said, and this little 10-year-old child, the next child who asked the question, he was developmentally delayed. He looked like all of the other children, but he couldn't read and he wouldn't read. Sweet little fellow. And he said to the mom, "How do you feel about the baby going in for the surgery?" And this couple was from Colombia. And she said, "I miss my family." And this little boy, quick, didn't miss a beat, he said, "We are your family." And the 3 visitors down on the desk from Australia said, "Where do you grow these Canadian children?" I said, "These aren't Canadian children. These are regular garden variety children. These are the children of the world. They are the entire hope of the future. They're not just a part of the future. They're 100% of the future. They have the capacities for such incredible caring. They have the ability to understand in the world. We're the same." We spend a lot of time in Roots of Empathy talking about how we're different. We talk about the baby's differences all the time. We say, we talk about temperament. Now, I don't know, we generally think in society that temperament means your personality. But when we say temperament, there are like 9 different temperament traits, and one of them is your first reaction. Is it to withdraw and be shy? Or are you one of those people who jumps in the deep end of the swimming pool of life? Or are you a very intense person? Do you feel things deeply? Do you laugh hard and cry hard? Or are you very moderate in your emotional responses? We talk about rhythmicity. Do you get hungry at regular times? You're a delight to raise if you do. If you've got a child with high rhythmicity, they're dead easy to raise, because when you make a meal, they eat it. And when you go to all the trouble to make a nice breakfast so they'll have a good day at school, they generally eat it. But if the child has low rhythmicity, they're not hungry on schedule ever, and worse still, they're never sleepy on schedule. So, and some other bodily functions too are difficult to train. So the children learn about all these differences, how their little baby may be very active, and that's another temperament trait. And you know in your womb if you've got an active baby. And some of these traits change over your lifetime, and you socialize yourself into a more acceptable way of being. If you're very, very intense, you can't live out loud all the time. It's not acceptable, So the children, in learning about the baby, realize that we love this baby even if this baby cries loud and long and often. We still love the baby. A crying baby is not a bad baby. It's a baby with a problem. That's what the children say. A baby who doesn't sleep very much, parents say, not meaning any harm, if they've got a baby who sleeps very well, they say, "Well, I'm lucky I've got such a good baby." They've got a baby with high rhythmicity. They did strike it lucky. And I have to tell you, the reason I started Roots of Empathy all these years ago was because I worked with families whose children had been abused physically and sexually. I worked with families where domestic violence was the norm. I worked with people incarcerated. Before that I had taught school, but I worked with hundreds of families. And what I realized in all this suffering that was meted out to the children, the common denominator in all of the offenses against the children was the absence of empathy. Nobody wakes up and decides they're going to hurt their child. Every parent does the best they can on any given day. There are no monsters, well, very few monsters out there. I never met a monster. And I worked with a woman who killed her child. She was not a monster. She was desperate. And our society didn't give her what she needed. And it was a generational repeat again and again, that you could trace it back. In all the abuse cases, you could trace it back. It was a repeat what the parent had experienced. That the absence of empathy, you know, if you don't have it, if you haven't experienced it, you can't give it. But you can, it's something that can't be taught, but it can be caught. It's something that we provide the opportunity, but the children do it. You can foster the development, you cannot make it happen. So that's what Roots of Empathy does. It breaks intergenerational cycles of violence and poor parenting, but for kids who are perfectly great, it makes them greater human beings. And my belief is that in Canada, we have traditionally been a leader in the world in peace. In many parts of the world, they call Roots of Empathy Canada's olive branch to the world. Because what they see is that when our children grow up, and they are the ones in the boardrooms, and they are the ones in the war rooms, they will understand that the people we're having our troubles with, they all have families like we do. They have all aspirations like we do. It gives them the basis for having a conversation. The Middle East peace talks have been going forever. If we could just, we've had the best minds in the world dealing with this. But if we had people at the table who approached it from the perspective of how are we the same? Where is our shared humanity in this? What is it we all want for our children? Because there's very little difference about what we want for our children. So there is a real hope. You know, I spent some time in New York recently, and one of the meetings I had was with a very wealthy foundation, and they want to support a strategy to build a plan to bring Roots of Empathy to the United States of America, because they're feeling helpless and hopeless, that things don't seem to be improving. And how do we get a generation of children in the United States who will be empathic? Because this is, I think, going to be the decade of empathy. What other tools? It's not another nuclear bomb. What is it we're trying to construct? What is our next tool dealing with war? Well, I think it's empathy, and I think it's courage, and I think it's imagination. And peace is certainly more than the absence of war. Peace, I think, is the presence of justice and the absence of fear. Children understand that. Children don't understand peace necessarily, but what they substitute for peace is what's fair. They know what's fair. Every child knows what's fair, and it's not just did she get a bigger slice of pizza than me. They know that it's only fair when every child has a sense of belonging, when every child feels included. Because the cruelest bullying of all is marginalizing a child and not letting them belong. That's the cruelest. Children would prefer to be punched and kicked and spit at than excluded. The biggest pain is the isolation of loneliness. And our culture does a very poor job about loneliness. In fact, we never talk about it. But in Roots of Empathy, we do talk about loneliness, and let me promise you, there is a pandemic of loneliness in Canada. We have Roots of Empathy right across Canada, and there are many of our children who are lonely. They do better if they have an affiliation in the community, a place to go after school. But many children are lonely in their own homes because nobody's saying, "How are you today, Susie? What's happened with you today?" And life is really not just about going faster. Life should be about going slower. You know, if we took the slow cooking approach to life, if we just simmered down, if we just looked into one another's eyes now and again, like the baby gazes into the parent's eyes, you know, that unwavering gaze babies have, where you feel they're looking into your souls. I believe they are. I think babies see us as we are, and that's why there is a power in our babies. You know, the little babies around the green blanket, when they learn to crawl, and the children are always so excited for every milestone, they are wildly excited for every milestone of the baby. They cheer, they clap. You know, the first time the baby flips over, you know how babies try and try and try to flip over? It's a big milestone because you can get places. The children clap, and you wouldn't believe how often the first flip is on the green blanket. They're performers. They know. It's almost as if they know they have all these children cheering for them. So the one time I was in a classroom where a little baby crawled forward for the first time. Now he had crawled backwards. The children had seen the baby crawl backwards. This was in Manitoba. And the baby crawled forwards, and they were all thinking, this is really exciting, and they were pulling the blanket on all sides so it wouldn't be slipping on the floor. They didn't have a proper rug under it. So they were all holding on to the blanket except one little boy who had his hands in his pocket. So every child, you know, was wishing that the baby would crawl to them. So he made a beeline for a little boy who wasn't very close to him. And he went over and he put his hands on the little boy's knees. And he looked up at the child, and you know, the other children were so generous that instead of saying, "Aw, he didn't come to me," they were happy for that little boy. They were saying things, "Oh, look how lucky Jamie is." And the baby was basically asking to be picked up. And the little boy still had his hands in his pocket. So I couldn't understand. It was an invitation from the baby. It was precious. Finally, he took his hands out of his pocket. Very deformed little hands, with a very, very large thumb coming out the wrong way, and webbed fingers. And he picked the baby up. And all of the children clapped. The instructor cried, the classroom teacher cried, Mary Gordon cried. It was an amazing moment that the baby knew. The babies find the children who have suffering in their hearts. They always go to the child who's the elective mute. They find the child. And we sing the baby around, and I'll show you a little clip of it. We use a lot of singing, because when we sing, we build solidarity. We're all the one. You feel a part of something. And in the world today, we need times where we feel a part of something. And not every child has a religious practice, and not every child has an extended family. Not every child belongs to a community where there's a chance to get together and be part of something bigger than yourself. And we do need that. So when we sing the baby in, and the baby has a chance to have a little visit with each child. And we sing the song as long as we need to. And the baby takes a little visit sometimes with different children. You wouldn't believe how important this is to them. Now, when I started this in '96, I didn't know anything about oxytocin. I never heard about it. Oxytocin is a hormone in the brain, and it's a good one. It makes us feel open and happy and affectionate and warm to others. So when you look into a baby's face and the baby looks at you, there is an instant release of oxytocin in your brain. It's why we fall about like fools, saying ridiculous things when we see a baby. Grown men are reduced to gaga and goo-goo. And it's because that's how we feel. And now we know that there is a reason, there's a brain chemistry reason why that happens. And it's one of the reasons why we hear from teachers that very often we hear that they say they teach their most difficult concept in whatever subject it is right after the family visit. Now we only have 9 family visits a year. There's 9 themes, but every time before the baby comes, we have a class session where we're working on a theme. And supposing the theme was crying, we would say to the children, there's a whole curriculum to go with this. What do you think would make the baby cry? And they make their list up. And then the mother comes and they check with the mother. And so it's kind of a projecting thing, making calculated guesses. We're making the children think. And then after the family visit, the following week, we have a reflective visit, where we encourage the children to reflect on what happened. And when were times when you felt like that? And when the baby is there, we ask the questions that the children had, and sometimes they're preposterous. The little children ask the most preposterous questions that are gorgeous. But, for instance, if they say, well, can the baby play hockey? And the first class, that often comes up. The mother won't say no. She'll say, not yet. Can the baby sit up? Not yet. Can the baby eat real food like a person, they'll say. Not yet. And the message is, you're a work in progress. You may not know how to read well. Not yet. You may not know how to tie your shoes. Not yet. You may not feel brave enough to stand up in the class and read. Not yet. So children give themselves permission, without any shaming or blaming, to work hard but realize they don't have to beat themselves up for not being perfect. And that we don't value people because of their skills and accomplishments. We value them because they're people. And we all offer different things. And we love this baby however this baby comes. So Charlene, if you could show a clip there about the baby going around the circle. Now this is baby May, and this is when May would have been, I suppose, maybe 7 months old. So she had been attending with the children for some months. Okay? No picture. There you go. So you can see how the children fall in love with the baby. She can't walk and she can't talk, but she's captured their hearts and their minds and their imaginations. And in life, children often wish for things. You know, at Christmas time they make their wish. It's all about what they can get, you know? But in Roots of Empathy, they make a wishing tree for the baby. And it's all about what they wish for the baby when the baby is their age. And it's never the latest computer game. It's things like, I wish baby May would not have asthma. Because some child has asthma. I wish baby May would always have a best friend. Do you know that is the single most popular wish? Having a friend. I wish baby May would never be bullied. I wish baby May's daddy would always have a job. I wish baby May's grandma wouldn't get dead. So the children have a remarkable capacity to understand and to want the world to be right for one little vulnerable person. And when you get a group of people caring for one little person, the experience of being able to care and to share, because they make presents for May. We don't allow kids to buy stuff. There's too much buying in the world. But they make a tape of songs for baby May that they make up. They make up rap songs if they're older. Beyond ridiculous. You should hear the songs. What is there? There's one rap song they do. Humpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty Dumpty Humpty Dumpty. So we learn from the children all the time. And they work together. We tape it. We give it to the family. And it's the favorite all-time thing that the baby listens to. In fact, there was one little baby, this is in downtown Toronto, where the baby was very colicky, and the baby started at 2 months, and unfortunately they tell you colic lasts for the first 3 months. It's a lie. It often lasts for 4, if any of you have had a colicky baby. So the mother said that, and the mother lived right across the street from the school, so the mother said that the thing that calmed the baby down most was singing the song, the hello song and the farewell song. And the children always put that on the tape when they give it to the baby. So the mother said that to the children. So the children, when they would come to school in the morning, when they would go home at lunchtime and back again and home in the evening, they even asked special permission to be able to cross the street with the person at recess. They would stand out in chorus in front of the house and sing, just in case the baby was crying. So the mother would routinely bring the baby to the window or to the door or say, "Shh, the baby's sleeping." So I just want you to see how incredible the children really are. And I guess love is passed like a flame between two candles, and that's what happens around the green blanket. And the capacity to love and care together is something that doesn't leave you. And empathy is something that once it's in place, you are changed. So, you know, I never give up on anybody, regardless how old. And the oldest person we ever had in a Roots of Empathy class was a boy who had failed a couple of years because he had been moved so frequently. And as an old teacher, I can tell you, very often for children, a move can result in a loss of 6 months of school. Because not so much the academic break, but the emotional break. It's very hard for children to resettle. Anyway, this boy had quite a tragic story. When he was 4, his mother was murdered in front of his eyes. So he had been in a series of foster care situations. And when he saw the picture, we hold up a picture of the baby, usually not long after birth or in the first couple of weeks, to say, this baby is going to be your Roots of Empathy baby and will be coming to our class all year long. So this boy, who used to play hooky more often than show up, when he saw the picture, he wanted to know what dates the baby would be coming. And he arranged his calendar accordingly. So, and this boy had tried so hard to make himself look fierce. And this is a long time ago. This is still in the 90s. He'd shaved his head except for a ridiculous ponytail on the top. And he had a tattoo at the back of his head. I mean, we didn't do that, and now it's quite acceptable. But maybe he was just ahead of his days. And the mother was showing the children, talking about temperament, and saying that her little baby really didn't like to be cuddled too much. And this was her first baby, and she'd waited a long time to have the baby. She knew she was having a baby girl, and she was really hoping to have a cuddly little girl she could dress up and put bows and things. Anyhow, she got Miss Independence. So, and she explained to the children that when she'd put the baby in the snuggly, the baby would scream unless she put the baby facing out. So then the bell went, and the children were quite noisy. And anyway, she said, would anybody like to try on the snuggly? And this young fella put up his hand, and everyone was surprised. He had no friends in the class. And anyway, at that point he didn't. So when he got the snuggly on, and it was more complicated in those days, there seemed to be endless straps. So then he was offered the baby, and he put the baby in chest to chest, having heard the mother said that you have to put the baby out, and the mother was a bit surprised. That baby molded to this boy. So he went off to the corner. It was very noisy in the room. And in the corner, he started rocking back and forth like this, like he'd seen the mother. You know that seasick rock mothers sometimes do? So he's rocking back and forth, and he's got his arms around the baby who's in the snuggly. And he came back, and it wasn't more, I suppose, than 3 or 4 minutes. And he said to the Roots of Empathy instructor, do you think that if no one has ever loved you, you could still be a good father? So I don't figure we have the right to give up on anybody. If you were to look at that boy, you wouldn't have much hope for him. But he had hope for himself. And Roots of Empathy is a pedagogy of hope. It's not about stuff. You know, it's not about you got to learn the development of the baby. Got to learn the development of our humanity. That we are all human beings, and there but for fortune, and we are a step away, as my mother used to say. When you fall down, you need someone to pick you up, not to push you down again. And little children are capable of learning that and doing that. And this idea of building an inclusive society, we have to set a place at the table for everybody, where they come in a high chair, a wheelchair, or a rocking chair. Doesn't matter what age or what ability they come with. If we are a civil society, if we are an empathic society, we make sure that there's room for everybody to be welcomed. There's a new book Jeremy Rifkin has written called Empathic Civilizations. Never in a million years would I imagine Jeremy Rifkin would write about empathy. Jeremy Rifkin is a very sophisticated population sort of writer. He wrote a book called The End of Work. It was considered radical at the time. As is this book considered radical. There are currently 5 books out on empathy. In Europe, I can't remember, in March, they're having a forum, and it's looking at empathy. Well, it's very interesting who they've invited. The Dalai Lama, which is not a surprise. J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling, the reason we use a lot of books in Roots of Empathy is because perspective taking is the cognitive part of empathy, the ability to imagine, to think about what the other person is thinking, to put yourself in that other person's shoes. Now, feeling is the affective part of it, your emotion. But she completely understands and talks about it now, that she feels she's helping develop empathy in her readers as they identify with the protagonist in her book, in her books. And the other guest will be roots of empathy because we're doing something about it. So the interesting thing is they're looking at what are we doing. Enough talk already. Where are the answers? How do you find this tree of empathy? Well, we found it in Canada, believe it or not. It's our homegrown program. And it happens in schools. And why in schools? Because schools are bastions of democracy. More change happens in schools than any other place on the planet except the family. You know, the war-torn sanctuary of the family. We beat up on our families so often in society, but the minute the family starts to unravel, so do we all. So it behooves us to hold the family in the palm of our hands, but the place where children have the most exposure next to the family is public education. And really, we can grow democracy there. So I'm going to stop my formal remarks because I always feel the best fun is the questions. And I'd like to invite you to say what you'd like to talk about. It mightn't be a question. It might be a comment, but no spitballs. So I see that Susan has a microphone down there. So if anybody has anything about the state of the world that they'd like to discuss, we have now a broken microphone. Yeah, no.
But yes, if you could come and use the mic, because we want to record your questions for the video, so you have to use the mic. Don't be shy. Oh, I see. I'm really technically challenged. Yeah. It's all yours.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm also taller than the mic. Anyways, you mentioned working with people who are incarcerated in your previous work. Do you have any plans to expand your program to people who, offenders?
Roots of empathy behind bars. In Tasmania, several years ago, I was on a speaking tour in that part of the world, and they really very seriously asked me, please come back and do this. And in Alberta, there was a Catholic chaplain who was sort of helping the prisoners. And he begged me to come back. And I used to volunteer at the Elizabeth Fry Society when I was a teenager, and then spent some time working around literacy in jails. I haven't quite figured it out is the answer. Yes, I will do it. But I don't know quite how. Because what we know that makes the switch is having the opportunity to observe without any pressure what goes on between a parent and a baby. It's that attunement of two people, that fine attachment. And it works better when it's in a group that's together over time. And you need to have enough time to see the changes in the baby and the relationship. So I haven't quite figured it out, but I have agreed to talk to the Attorney General in Northern Ireland when I go back now in November, because he has group homes where he's got older teens who are there for a long period of time, who I'm going to try a program. They're basically incarcerated, they're just too young to be in jail. So ask me next year, and I might be better. Hello?
Oh, related to that, boys seem to be much more physical than girls. And I know many, many mothers have expressed concern about how do they raise their boys to be gentle. You have advice for mothers on the approach they should take?
Well, there's no question as a group. Ask any kindergarten teacher who's got all boys versus mixed. Boys are, as a group, are more physical. And it doesn't mean they're not more gentle in their feelings. It means they're maybe not more gentle in their touch. So I think so often little boys get a bad rap. They also, because neurologically they're about 6 months developmentally behind little girls, so that when you ask a question in class, you see little girls' hands go up when they're young before the little boys. It's because the little girls have a better connection between their mind and their mouth than little boys, which makes them appear to be more socially finessed than little boys, who might act first, which makes them look worse. So, in fact, just to interject there in Roots of Empathy, we never ask the person who has their hand up first, ever. We always wait. There's no rush. It's just, reflect here a bit. So you ask the 7th or 8th hand up, so they realize there's no reward here in having the first hand up. But for mothers raising little boys who are very physical, it's nothing wrong with being physical. Our schools aren't designed to be physical because you can't manage a group of 25 children if they're being physical, but we better be mighty sure we allow a lot of space for them to be physical legitimately. And if they have opportunities to be physical legitimately, we all live happily ever after. It's when they need to be physical and it's inappropriate, like at the dinner table, like at church, like at wherever they are. And I'm not talking about children who have attention deficit hyperactivity. I'm talking about normal little boys. So I think we need to, at home, understand the developmental needs of each of our children, and they're different. So you could have a little girl who is also very high needs. For example, little boys get in trouble if they're very active and they're sitting at the chair at dinner. Why? Because there's never 4 legs of the chair on the floor at the same time. They're not wicked, they're active. And in our society, we equate misbehavior with physical activity when you're not in the playground. So in terms of gentleness, if you mean gentleness, spiritedness, if we speak in the same way to our girls and our boys, which we don't, we would have no difference in their gentleness. Because a gentleness is the ability to see the vulnerability and respond to another with gentleness. In Roots of Empathy, we don't have any problem with little boys being rough with the baby. It's never, ever been an issue. We talk about how delicate the babies are. Everybody gets it. I don't think you're going to socialize rambunctiousness out of kids. If you've got a lot of little boys in your family, you're going to have a lot of noise, and you're lucky if you have a rumpus room. So it can happen legitimately. Or send them out. So I don't think that's very helpful advice, but I grew up with a lot of boys. And when I was a teacher, I loved getting the boys because their energy was so high. If you could get it going in a positive way, the little boys had fabulous ideas. And we had a lot of fun. Little girls tend to be more compliant, and that's dangerous. Little girls I worked with who were sexually abused were very compliant. So we teach our babies. We'll listen to you. We'll respect your right to say no if you don't want me to lift you up. Do you know the hidden message in all of that? Every little child around the blanket realizes, I have the right to say no. I have dignity in and of myself. I have personhood. We never talk about it, but they get it. So, yeah, next question.
Part commercial. We are blessed in the Catholic School Board with all of our instructors are volunteers from local community agencies, Ontario, Early Years Center, Marymount, Child Reach, and I think somebody now from Children's Aid Society. Could you tell us a little bit, you talked about the baby and the mother, could you tell us a little bit about the instructors that you have sort of nationally and internationally? And as well, if anyone's interested in being an instructor, get connected up with this lady up here.
Sure.
We'll find somewhere where you can work. Thanks.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Maria. The Roots of Empathy instructors is no one mold. generally speaking, what we find is they're very empathic people. They value the idea of empathy. They don't have to be experts with teaching children, but there are a couple of core skills, and we ask that people have one of them, and we'll train for the rest. So a lot of people who have worked with little babies or with mothers and babies, we get a lot of nurses who've retired, who've been pediatric nurses, who are so happy to work with healthy babies. But you don't have to be a baby expert, because the training and the curriculum give you all of that. But you do have to be able to be nurturing to the mother and the baby. And we do make one home visit before the program starts. And there is a connection to this mother and baby that you call up and you say, you know, the kids had their pre-family visit and they have all these questions for you. Just so we don't catch you off guard. They're going to be asking you, what's your favorite song you sing to the baby? So if you don't have one, you might want to think about that. And they're going to be asking you, what made you sad, or what were you afraid of when you were a little girl? So there's that kind of a connection. Also, the thing that's really interesting is people who have had some kind of experience, group experience with children, whether they're little children or children as old as grade 8, that they feel comfortable to be sitting down talking to a group of children. Now, in Roots of Empathy, most of the talking is the children. We facilitate. We ask questions, and we are still, and we leave lots of spaces for children to respond. We have activities where you read a book in the post-family visits. There's 27 visits over the school year. So the post-family visit, when the family isn't with you, we read a book, and then there's, in the curriculum, a question to ask the children to consider. We never judge them. In fact, we really work from a position of intrinsic motivation, meaning that we don't reward children for what they've said, for good thinking, right answers, or clever things. We acknowledge their contribution because we don't want the power to be with us. We want the children to be the ones to decide that if they have something to say, that we will respect the time for them to say it. So we have to deprogram ourselves a lot because we're so used to saying to kids, great answer. We're so used to praising them because we think that's helping and encouraging them. And there's a difference between encouraging children and praising them, because when you praise children in a group, all of the little ones who are a little bit tentative, who maybe aren't the best public speakers, or maybe who haven't been too successful in some of their schoolwork, or they stutter, or they're new to Canada and they don't feel very fluent, they never say anything. But when you don't praise the children, when you just say, yeah, thanks, or something like that, you'll find every single child in the class talks. And that really changes, because the children who think, oh, Tommy over there, he never says anything, suddenly Tommy has something to say. So that idea of an instructor being able to be still and to be quiet and to pull the children out. So we're not looking for spiffy teachers. In fact, as a teacher, it's really hard not to take over, because we're so used to having to take over, you know. We're so used to organizing everything and being responsible for making everything happen. The thing is, you got the classroom teacher there, and if there's any discipline issues, the classroom teacher is there to support. But believe it or not, rarely, right? Rarely discipline issues. It's very, very rare in the Roots of Empathy class. So the instructor could be any age, generally not youngsters. We find the more experience you have under your belt, usually the more forgiving you are of the children. And so people can come from, you don't have to be a parent to do this. You don't have to have had that experience of being a parent, but you do have to like kids. And you don't have to be that skilled. You do have to be able to follow a curriculum. We have a curriculum that's very clearly written out, but There's a discipline of following the curriculum. You can't wing it. There's a real, because we have a lot of research, we really ask that the program be delivered as written. There's a 4-day training, there's mentoring, lots of hand-holding and friendship in this. It's like a big group. Hi. That's
in my hand. That works better. What do you think about the extreme sense of competition they teach the little children? Not always the little babies, but as soon as they grow up and they get around 8, 9, 10 years old,
Yes.
they got to compete.
Yes.
Well, what do you think about that? I'm afraid I disapprove of that very much, because wars come only from competition. I think that one country likes to do better than the other, and if they can't do it, then that's it.
Well, I thank you for your question, and I take your point. I think a certain amount of competition is innate, in that if you look at a group of kindergarten children, even though the teacher hasn't got a competition going for who can run fastest, the children will tell you. They know who runs the fastest, even though we haven't done anything to make that a value. I think where competition becomes really destructive is when children value themselves relative to the other children's performance. Because you can't hold a child accountable against the marker of another child's performance. The only measure that a child should have of himself is, how did I do yesterday, and how am I doing today, and what do I aspire for tomorrow? And that's why we look at intrinsic pride also. So we say to the children, when was the time that you felt proud? And they without telling them, they'll say, well, when I won the spelling bee, or when I got the shot in hockey, or when I, something like that. It's like a public display of your superiority. We say, no, we don't mean that. We mean really proud of who you are. Proud inside, that no medals, no trophies, inside, because that's the only thing that counts. So the children have a hard time with that, because societally, we value, what is that dance show, and then they perform. Everything is about being the best, the first. Like the world votes to find the best dancer, the world votes to find the best singer, and don't start me on reality shows. So this idea of competition is innate in our, well, not innate, but it is cultivated in our society, and there's enough of it, and children have to have this inner sense of self in order to be able to deal with the world that is. But it doesn't mean we should put them in boot camp at 5 to become competitive so that they'll be able to deal with competition. That is not how it works. Yeah. No, we're doing, I was just in Korea. Oh my goodness, if you think we're in trouble. Korea and Japan. The children have a schedule that starts before any of us are out of bed. And the schedule continues after formal school, there's informal school. And then there's homework. And the children, of any of them, are getting less sleep than you and I are. And they're anxious. And little children are having stomach ulcers. So Korea sent one of their TV stations this week to our office to do a documentary on Roots of Empathy. I told them, I'm sorry, we can't bring Roots of Empathy yet. Because first of all, we want the program throughout Canada, and I particularly want the program for our Aboriginal peoples. And we're completely busy right now in Canada, and we've made other promises to other places, and we won't go further until we can meet the promises we've made. So it'll be at least 2 years before we get there. So they said they want the documentary so that the children who are growing up in the next 2 years, that their parents and their teachers might see that children can become glorious human beings without having to compete with one another about everything. The fact that a parent would be so disappointed with a child because the child's friend scored higher on something is to deny who the child is. And the poor parents are being pushed to that too.
Nobody's happy about it. So why don't they say, halt, enough, draw the line? Because what do we want? I mean, I said to you in the beginning that I really feel the measure of a civil society is how we treat our children. So what do we want for them? Do we want a world that's fit for them? Do we want children that fits for the world? Do we want empathic human beings? You know, what do we want? Because we can have whatever we want. We can set the policies to develop whatever we want. But I'm afraid it's going down a slippery slope in many places that you're speaking of. And yes, it does concern me. The mental health of children is being severely affected. Susan, do you have any? Yeah?
As we bring our evening to a close, I'd just like to invite Wilma Duran from the London Catholic District School Board to come forward to thank Mary on our behalf.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this evening's lecture. The London District Catholic School Board has been a proud sponsor of the Religious Life series for several years, and we were particularly proud to sponsor this year's opening lecture on the Decade of Empathy. As some 13 of our schools and approximately 1,500 students have participated in the Roots of Empathy program, I want to make note that within the audience this evening, there are instructors, teachers, parents, and principals from the London District Catholic School Board and the Thames Valley District School Board who are participants and, most importantly, champions of the program. In addition, I know there are representatives here from various community organizations, such as Investing in Children, who have worked tirelessly in our community to support the good work of Roots of Empathy and to bring its powerful and life-changing message to so many. Every year in our board, we have a wrap-up event to the Roots of Empathy program called the Baby Celebration. And I'm not sure if I can create as vivid an image as I would like to help you to get a sense of the positive impact of the program. But picture a very large room, something similar to this, where all the chairs and tables have been pushed against the wall. Picture some 20 infants accompanying parents, teachers, and students that are scattered around the room and in this open space. Now picture strollers, car seats, green blankets, bottles, and toys strewn across the open floor space. Now picture babies crawling, some walking, some having diapers changed, some being fed, some sitting on mom or dad's or a student's lap, or some playing and interacting with students and adults in the room. Now here, babbling babies, some crying, lots of laughter, lots of talking. And now feel caring, kindness, tenderness, and love. And if you can picture this room and the activity I've described, then you have a small sense of one of the best days in our school system and a small sense of the impact of the Roots of Empathy program. Our school board embraced this program because it focuses on safe and caring classrooms, because its goals of preparing students to be responsible citizens and responsive parents align so well with our Catholic graduate expectations. Mary Gordon knew that there was a need in the world. She had a vision about how to fulfill that need, and most importantly, took action to address the need in a meaningful and sustainable way. Mary, thank you for your vision, and for understanding that we need to educate both the mind and the heart of our students from a very early age. Thank you for your belief that better citizens can be created when individuals recognize the needs of others as equal to their own. In the first letter of John, he writes, "Little children, our love is not to be just words or mere talk, but something real and active. Only by this can we be certain that we are children of the truth. His commandments are these, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and that we love one another as he told us to. Mary, we believe, as you do, that the world can be changed, one child at a time, if we but teach them to love." Thank you.
before you leave, just a reminder that there are books at the back of the room if you would like to purchase one. And just a reminder that in this very place next week, at this very same time, we will be hosting Susan Aglukark, so hopefully we will see some of you back for that. I wish you a safe journey home, and thank you for coming.